I start this film in Southampton, where a number of Cunard liners, especially those employed on the Southampton to New York run, would commence their voyages. Other ships were employed out of Liverpool. Most served on the Liverpool to Montreal run, and some of the smaller ones on the Liverpool to New York voyages. We will soon start with a lot of film taken before the war, and this is all in black and white. And then we'll move on to some more recent film taken after the war and up to the recent time, finishing with a QE2. Here we see Saxonia leaving Liverpool. I'm going to start with film taken of Carmania as she leaves Montreal on her homeward voyage. She was launched in 1905 and entered service the same year on the Liverpool to New York run. In 1914 she was converted to an auxiliary cruiser and then converted again as a troop transport in 1916. In 1918, at the end of the war, she was converted back again for passenger service. Once again, she was on the Liverpool to New York service. Then, in 1924, she went on to serve the Liverpool-Montreal route, and in 1926, the London to New York service. So she had a varied career, being broken up in 1932. Our next ship is Mauretania, built by SWAN Hunter and launched in 1906. She was 31,938 tons. The first three clips show her cruising in the West Indies. She started her life on the Liverpool to New York run. In 1908 she won the Blue Ribbon for the fastest crossing of the Atlantic. During the First World War she served as a troop transport from 1915 and then was converted to a hospital ship, but in 1916 she was back to trooping again. Having been reconditioned in 1919, she started a new career on the Southampton to New York run, and in 1921 had another complete refit. She was back again on the Southampton to New York route in 1922, but in 1930 she was doing mainly cruising, and she was painted white in 1933. She's seen here at the end of a voyage from New York approaching Southampton. She was scrapped in 1935. Built by Vulcan of Hamburg, this 52,000-ton liner was named Imperator and launched in 1912. She made her maiden voyage from Cuxhaven to New York in June 1914. At the outbreak of the First World War in August 1914, she was laid up. In 1919 she was handed to the USA as a troop transport and chartered by Cunard in 1920. June the 6th she sailed from Southampton to New York at the start of a new career. The charter continued until 1921 when she was sold to Cunard and renamed Berengaria. A serious fire in March 1938 put an end to her career and she was sold for scrap in 1939. Another First World War War Prize, 56,500 ton Majestic of White Star Line, was originally built as Bismarck by Blom and Voss and launched in 1914, but not completed until 1922. She's seen here steaming up Southampton water and will soon pass the Berengaria. At this time, the Majestic was the largest liner in the world. What a wonderful sight to have seen these two big liners passing each other. Majestic on her way in and the Berengaria on her way out to New York. In 1934, during the Depression, White Star and Cunard amalgamated. In 1936, the Majestic was sold to the British Admiralty and renamed HMS Caledonia. She was burnt out in 1940 and scrapped as a result. I wish I had a little bit more about Aquetania, particularly shots of the ship at sea. However, the material I have shows that cruisers in the 20s and 30s were no more inhibited than cruisers of today. They were out to enjoy themselves. It's handshakes all round as we leave for the cruise. Aquetania, built by Brown of Clydebank, was 45,600 tons and launched in 1913. She made her maiden voyage in 1914 from Liverpool to New York, and then she was used as an auxiliary cruiser. She was converted for troop transport in 1915. She resumed service in 1919, but this time on the Southampton to New York route, where she was to be employed until the outbreak of the Second World War in 1939, when once again she converted to a troop transport. In 1948, she was converted to a one-class ship sailing from Southampton to Halifax. She was sold in 1949 and broken up in 1950. Here we see a boxing match on board. Whether it was a crew or passengers, I don't know. And then the ship arrives at Gibraltar and we get our first glimpse of her in the distance as the passengers go ashore. Coming back on board later, they will board from the tender. As you watch, you will see that the hijinks continue. Is this romance on the high seas? Well, maybe not. I think we'll just leave them to get on with it. Alaunia was built by Brown of Clydebank and launched in 1924. She was 14,000 tons. She made her maiden voyage for Cunard in 1925 on the Liverpool-Montreal run. At the outbreak of war in 1939, she was converted to be an armed cruiser and sold to the Admiralty in 1944 to be used as a repair ship. She was scrapped in 1957. Here we see her leaving Montreal. We will watch Queen Mary at her launch, on her maiden voyage, and then on her last voyage down Southampton water, on her way to Long Beach in California. Queen Mary was built by Brown on Clydebank and was to be 80,774 tons. She was laid down in 1930, but her building was delayed by the Depression. She was eventually launched in 1934 and made her maiden voyage from Southampton to New York in 1936. She first won the Blue Ribbon for the fastest crossing of the Atlantic in August 1936, lost it and then won it back again in August 1938, and that stood until 1952, when the new liner United States captured the trophy. Soon after the beginning of the war in 1939, she was laid up in New York, but then in 1940 converted as a troop transport. In 1942 she had a most unfortunate collision with the cruiser Curaçao. A lot of lives were lost as the cruiser was split in half by the mighty liner. After the war she was used to repatriate a number of the American troops from the European theatre to New York. In 1947 she recommenced her passenger career, sailing from Southampton to New York. Finally, in 1967 she was sold to the city of Long Beach in California, and she's still there as a hotel and tourist attraction. We're now going to join her as she leaves Southampton on her maiden voyage. Crowds came out to watch her depart. We get a wonderful view from the crow's nest. For a ship of her age, there was surprisingly little clutter on the foredeck. We join the officers and crew on the bridge. You might note the black caps. The use of white caps all the time didn't come in until 1955. The boat deck. These massive ventilators took air down to the engine room and to the punkaluva system which cooled the ship. After 5 days at sea, we arrived in New York with its massive and unmistakable skyline. Not surprisingly, a large crowd turned out to welcome the new liner. We now have some colour pictures, and here we see Queen Mary off the Isle of Wight. Queen Mary is seen here leaving Southampton for the last time. It was a momentous, if sad, occasion, and lots of tugs and small ships and vessels of all kinds came out to wave goodbye. Paying off pennant can be seen fluttering proudly from the mainmast. She even had a London bus on board. This, no doubt, to add to her entertainment value in Long Beach. We can watch her now as she makes her way slowly down Southampton Water to the open sea. She gives a farewell blast on the ship's horn. Masses of small craft of all shapes and sizes have come to see her off. And this is the last we shall see of her on this side of the Atlantic as she makes her way out into the open sea. The 35,700-ton Mauretania II was built by Camel Laird for Cunard and launched in 1938. She made her maiden voyage in 1939 from Liverpool to New York. In 1940 she became a troop transport and was released in 1946 when she went back onto the Southampton to New York run. She was broken up in 1965. We now come to the second of our queens, Queen Elizabeth. Launched in 1938, she was built by Brown of Clydebank and was 83,673 tons. We can watch her here as she's launched by Queen Elizabeth. She then went to be fitted out, but the outbreak of the war in 1939 stopped all that, and she sailed for New York in 1940 in great secrecy. She sailed again, this time to Sydney, where she was fitted out as a troop ship, and like her sister, the Queen Mary, she carried thousands of troops during the course of the war. In March of 1946, she was returned to the Cunard Company and was then fitted out for passenger travel. She made her maiden voyage from Southampton to New York in 1947, by which time she was 81,237 tons. Transatlantic flying was still in its infancy in 1947. And for about 5 or 6 years she carried an enormous amount of passengers, always fully booked. Amongst them were very many famous celebrities who would make the most of any photo opportunities as they boarded or disembarked. Ocean Terminal at that time was in its heyday, with passengers arriving by rail and road. We're going to join her now as she prepares to leave for New York from the very misty and murky Southampton. Loading of last-minute stores and passenger baggage takes up the remaining time. The Cunard flag flutters proudly from the main mast, and the blue ensign flying from the sternpost denotes that the captain, some of his officers and men are members of the Royal Naval Reserve. There were always a number of sightseers and passengers' friends who came down to the ocean terminal to wave goodbye. An Alexander tug takes up the strain. Passengers line the decks and wave their last goodbyes. Their business or holiday done, they'll probably be coming back on either the Queen Elizabeth or the Queen Mary or another one of the company's ships in 2 or 3 weeks' time. The huge liner pulls away from the wharf, ably assisted by numerous tugs fore and aft. In the 50s, 60s and 70s, Southampton was a wonderful place to see the big liners sailing and coming in, particularly if you went out in one of the red funnel steamers or hired a boat, but many people just watched from the shore. We can watch now as Queen Elizabeth makes a voyage from Southampton to New York. Passengers on a red funnel ferry give her a wave as she passes. She's seen here passing the Isle of Wight. It's pretty cold and the decks are deserted. We can see her here from the boat deck as she rolls, pitches and tosses in the Atlantic swell. As we get towards the end of our journey across the Atlantic, the skies turn blue and we'll soon be heading into New York. Passengers begin to line the deck as we approach the Statue of Liberty. There's always a big welcome for any of the Queens coming into New York. Journeys end and she's tied up in the shadow of the skyscrapers which dominate the skyline of this big city. A day or two later, she's ready to embark a new set of passengers for her return voyage. And we see her here as she approaches the Isle of Wight. The King George V dock in Southampton was the only one big enough in the UK to take this enormous ship. Sold to US interests in 1969 and then resold in 1970 to Sea Tung in Hong Kong. She was renamed Seawise University and burnt out 1972 whilst refitting. We can watch her here as she leaves Southampton for the last time. On her way out, she called in at Gibraltar. When she left Gibraltar, she had a marvellous send-off, the Royal Navy taking a big part. And we leave her here as she leaves Gibraltar and makes her way towards Hong Kong and her eventual fate. The RAF give her a fly past as her paying off pennant streams out from the main mast. Built by John Brown and launched in 1947, Caronia made her maiden voyage in 1949 from Southampton to New York, and then was used for cruising. I first saw her in Naples in 1955, went on board and was amazed at the luxury. I was particularly impressed by the purpose-built cinema, unheard of in our ships. She was sold in 1968 to Panamanian interests and renamed Caribia. She was broken up in 1974. Yet another Cunard ship to be built by Brown on CLYDEBANK. Saxonia was 21,600 tons and was launched in 1954. She was destined for the Liverpool to Montreal service and made her maiden voyage the same year. In 1957 she switched to Southampton as her home port and then ran regularly Southampton to Montreal and back, reverting to Liverpool in 1961. We see her here on a rather misty day in Liverpool. We get a slightly better view of her as she sails out again from Liverpool on her way to Montreal. In 1962 she was renamed Carmania, and we'll look at Carmania next. Saxonia was renamed, as I said, Carmania in 1962 and refitted, and she was 22,590 tons. She was used mainly for cruising, but did also the Rotterdam to Montreal service. She was painted bright green. She's seen here in Southampton and later on a West Indian cruise. From 1967 to 1971 she had a white hull and was sold in 1973 and became the Leonardo Sobinov. Another Cunard ship like Saxonia, the Ivernia, built by Brown on CLYDEBANK, was 21,717 tons, was launched in 1954 and started her maiden voyage in 1955, Liverpool to Montreal, and then in 1957, Southampton to Montreal, and in 1962 she was refitted and renamed Franconia and painted bright green. She was also employed on the Rotterdam to Montreal route. In 1967 she was painted white, and from 1969 she was on cruising duties only. She was sold to the Panamanians and called the Fedor Shalapin in 1973. She's seen here in Southampton. The last ship built by Brown of CLYDEBANK for Cunard was QE2. She was 65,863 tons and launched in 1967. She made her maiden voyage from Southampton to New York in 1969. Here we see some very cloudy shots of the QE2 being launched, taken by an amateur photographer. And here we see her fitting out, again taken by the same photographer. With the engines in place and the funnel put on, it was time to get some steam up. We can watch now as QE2 gets ready for her maiden voyage from Southampton. You will see here a red funnel boat crowded with sightseers going around Southampton Harbour, and she's having a good look at the new QE2. It's not long before visitors are gathering to see the ship depart. They will see this car being loaded for one of the lucky passengers on the maiden voyage. Commodore Warwick was the master. His son Ron Warwick would later also captain this marvellous ship. Good luck and best wishes to Queen Elizabeth II. Time draws near for her departure. The bands are playing and the streamers are being thrown from ship to shore and from shore to ship. Somebody's been busy blowing up balloons. Gradually, she draws away from the quay. She steams slowly down Southampton water towards the open sea. Her next port of call will be Cherbourg. A fleet of small boats come out to greet her on this maiden voyage. After a short stay in Cherbourg, where she'll pick up some extra passengers, she's ready to sail for New York. Passengers gather on deck as she arrives at the port. The unmistakable skyline of New York and the Statue of Liberty. A great crowd are on the Cunard pier to welcome her. The next set of pictures were taken later in her career. By now her funnel had been painted red and black, familiar colours for the Cunard line. She's seen here approaching Suva on her last world cruise. QE2 had a checkered history. In 1974 she suffered a boiler failure which led to having to be towed into Hamilton, Bermuda, and in 1976 she had an engine room fire. Nevertheless, she remained a popular ship, and although not often employed on the Southampton to New York run anymore, she spent most of her time cruising. This last world cruise finished in early 2008, and later in the year, having been sold to Dubai interests, she sailed for Dubai. The rumour is, in August of 2009, that she'll go to Cape Town to accommodate visitors to the World Cup. We see QE2 here berthed in Auckland, again on her final world cruise. She left later that evening to a great ovation. She sailed on to Sydney, where she was in the harbour with the Queen Victoria. She then sailed around the Australian coast to Fremantle, where she was to leave Australia for the very last time. As you will see, all sorts of different types of craft came out to bid her farewell. We say goodbye to her as she sails away into the sunset. Built for Norwegians by SWAN Hunter, Vistafjord was launched in 1972 and she was to be 24,490 tons. She was purchased by Cunard in 1983 and she continued under the same name and in the same colours until 1999. Here she's seen at the D-Day celebrations in 1994. In 1999, as the Caronia, she was repainted in the usual Cunard colours. We can join her here on a cruise to Amsterdam on Fleur and Guernsey and back to Southampton. Despite the fact that this was just 1 week before Christmas, the skies were blue and the weather fine. Here we see her tied up outside Honfleur. In 2005 she was sold to SAGA and renamed SAGA Ruby. Built by Burmaster and Wayne in Copenhagen, Cunard Countess was 17,586 tons and was launched in 1974 and completed in 1976. Her purpose was cruising. We can join her here on a West Indies cruise. There would be plenty of time for sunbathing, swimming, using the jacuzzis and deck games, in between frequent stops at various Caribbean islands. We can watch now as the Cunard flag is hoisted on the jackstaff and the officers on the bridge bring her carefully to her mooring. The tiny little sea goddesses, 1 and 2, were built by Helsinki in 1984 and 1985 for Sea Goddess Cruises Norway. They were chartered to Cunard in 1986 and transferred to SEABOURNE Cruises in 1998. They have since been sold on and now cruise as Sea Dream 1 and 2.